think the biggest thing is just more data is always helpful, especially when you're kind of competing at the top end of the sport. Like those little incremental differences can not make or break your race, but they all help, you know, and if you can find 5 things that move the needle a fraction of a percent, all of a sudden that can be a significant boost. And so this was one of the things that I was really interested in getting in here to do. I think Stryd Performance Lab is a great setting for this, to just look at 2 racing shoes that Adidas has out and see how they stack up for me specifically against each other.
But basically we did 6 by 5 minutes on the treadmill with about equal rest to make sure that fatigue wasn't carrying over between the reps. And the reason that we do it inside and then do it outside, which outside we did 6 by like 2.5 to 3 minutes, or basically 800s at the same pace with equal rest, is inside. It's obviously standardized. So there's no like wind, and the temperature stays the same, and it's flat as can be, and you know, we have control over all the variables. And also I can verify Stryd numbers with the metabolic cart, which is like the gold standard for general metabolic efficiency.
Yep.
So that's all great, and you know, there's a lot of labs that do that, but the great thing about Stryd is we can actually see what the numbers look like outdoors, which is where it matters. I mean, like as you were saying,
Yeah,
like
I'm not running in a vacuum.
right, like even yesterday when you're running on it, you're like, yeah, like, you know, treadmills are okay, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So we were able to take you outdoors after, and then I was able to kind of correlate all those numbers together and kind of give you a good idea of what we got going. Adidas Pro 4, so this one is gonna be about 0.15% difference better.
Yep.
So pretty minimal.
Yep.
You know, time saved over the course of a 2-hour, 8-minute marathon, about 12 seconds, which is about like half a second a mile.
Yep.
Which is, you know, very minimal.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, you also prefer the Adidas Pro 4, and familiarity and being comfortable with the shoe goes a long way as well. Mm-hmm. So even if the difference is minimal, like if you also are more familiar with that shoe, then for sure, like I would recommend picking that based off of just these metabolic numbers. We had the Stryd on the whole time during the indoor, and then obviously during the outdoor. And this is kind of where things get a little bit more interesting. So obviously, like the Adidas Pro 4 verified by the metabolic cart, slightly more efficient. But also we see that the Pro 4 has significantly higher leg spring stiffness, 11.1 versus 10.7. Leg spring stiffness is basically like if you were to take like a rubber band,
Yep.
it's like the stiffness of that rubber band.
Mm-hmm.
So when you pull a stiff rubber band back, it's gonna snap back harder,
Yep. Right.
which is great for energy return. So that's like a performance metric, and it is exceeding in that category. For duty factor, which is basically like the percentage of time that you're spending on the ground during like a Stryd phase, it is lower in the Pro 4 versus the Evo 2, which is like a good correlation, another good performance metric, or like showing efficiency, because the less time that you spend on the ground means that you're putting more effective force into the ground, spending more time in the air.
Yep.
We see that there as well. That's correlated like very highly, performance and efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
We did see that the Evo 2 had a slightly lower vertical oscillation, so it means you're not moving up and down as much.
Right.
But some mistakes that people make is like, oh, my vertical oscillation is lower, then therefore I'm smoother.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily the case, and Stryd kind of gives you good insight into that.
Mm-hmm.
So form power is basically the vertical component of power that you're putting into your Stryd.
Yep.
And between the Evo 2 and the Pro 4, it's the same thing.
Identical.
So it basically means that for the same amount of power that you're putting into the vertical component, you're actually getting a little bit more flight time from the Pro 4.
Yep.
So you kind of have to look at vertical oscillation and form power like together.
Yeah.
And like I said, like having that longer flight time, especially at faster speeds, is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of goes with like the duty factor metric that we see here.
Cool.
So basically the main takeaways was duty factor is lower, leg spring stiffness is higher, power is the same, impact loading rate, which I actually didn't touch on, is basically the same. Impact loading rate is basically the rate at which force is applied to your body when you're stepping. So the higher the rate of that force, the more like impact you can think that you're taking.
Okay.
So the more load.
Yep.
But these are basically the same between these two.
Sure.
And then here I have basically like your footpath. I don't know if you've seen your footpath before.
I think did you get it when we did the metabolic
We might
testing?
have, yeah.
But
basically the solid lines, the Evo 2, and the dotted is the Pro 4. Don't really see too many differences, which kind of aligns with like the balance metrics being pretty similar. It seems like with the Evo 2, you might be kicking out a little wider, which kind of goes to like that feeling you're talking about being maybe a little bit more unstable. So everything's basically the same from the outdoor to the indoor, which is great. I mean, it shows Stryd's versatility in one, like correlating with the metabolic cart data that the Pro 4 is your best one, and then actually showing in the actual place that you're running that it's generally the same. But as we can kind of tell with like the impact loading rate metric, it is important, even more important maybe, to test outside, right? Because like we wouldn't have seen that on the treadmill. And maybe if that was a factor we're more taking into account, say for a trainer, where you want a lower impact loading rate more than a performance shoe, then that would be like a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure.
So it kind of just goes to that fact. And I mean, we've kind of talked about this before, but like in the future for testing and things like that, and even for people at home, like you don't need this whole lab setup. Like it's great to have standardized data and being able to compare and make sure everything aligns up, but like I can come out to a workout and we can just have you switch shoes through threshold K reps or whatever it is and have like a really good idea.
Yeah, so when you sent the data over last night, like one of the things that you said was, like you said that it's like 12 seconds over the course of the marathon that the Adios Pro 4 seems to have the edge over the Evo 2.
Yes.
But you're like, that may actually extrapolate out more.
Possibly,
and that ties mostly to the leg spring stiffness. Is that what you said? Or what is the metric that you're using to maybe be like, oh, well, maybe in the last 10K, this gap widens as you fatigue? Like what metric would point toward that?
So basically the performance metrics you're looking at is leg smooth stiffness and duty factor.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, even though the metabolic data is great, it's taken when you're fresh and not when you're tired. So these beneficial mechanical factors that we're seeing in the Adidas Pro 4 in the leg spring stiffness and duty factor, maybe when you're tired, because they're higher to begin with, you still get like a relatively, like even if it lowers when you're tired, it's still relatively higher. And maybe even that gap between those two numbers, because it's lower already, maybe that gap widens and then the performance deficit or difference between the two widens as well. You could even make the same argument the other way though, like I was saying with, a slightly lower impact loading rate in the Evo 2, maybe in the last 6 miles, because you're accumulating, slightly less stress over the course, that maybe it might save your legs a little bit more. But again, like you're dealing with like very small, like minute changes and every other data point is pointing toward the Pro 4 being better and you're more familiar with it. So I would like be very confident in saying that that's the best shoe for you.
But yeah, like when you think about someone who is maybe just on the cusp of that BQ or an OTQ, like they probably have the breadth of every
options,
brand to choose from. And it's like, if you could test, you gotta have the budget to go out and buy 10 different models of super shoe, which probably not everyone does, but it'd be cool as like just a thought experiment to have somebody just go shotgun method and buy a super shoe or two from every brand and see, is there one that feels significantly better from a data standpoint than the other one? And it's just cool that answer is probably a little different for every person.
No, for sure. I mean, it's so like, I've seen like 0% benefit from super shoes for some people, which it's supposed to be an average of 4, right? Like that was Nike's whole thing. But like some people don't get benefits from certain shoes. And in the era of everyone wearing super shoes, 4% is a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially over the course of a marathon. But I mean, even like Stryd's great, even if like, I don't know if running shoe stores are cool with this, but like even if you went to the running shoe store and tried 3 different shoes and just popped them on each shoe and did like a minute like on the block or 30 seconds on the block at marathon pace, that would honestly give you enough data right there to at least give you a pretty good idea. The value of kind of using just Stryd in like an outdoor scenario is, say like we have you wear the pods for like a month and I get a month of data in both shoes over different training sessions. Then I get data not only when you're fresh, like how we did, but I get data when you're tired and everything else over different terrain and everything like that. And I can aggregate all that data over a month and then select specific speeds.
Yep.
So I can, compare apples to apples still, but in a real life scenario and in a scenario where you're actually experiencing fatigue that you would experience in the marathon. And then that would give us even more insights into like, is that impact loading rate actually making a difference?
Right.
Maybe not.
Yep.
Is that performance gap widening? Like the Pro 4 is getting exponentially like better relative to the Evo 3 or Evo 2 as you get tired.
Yep.
That's kind of like the extra layer that like Stryd can provide in terms of like that analysis, rather than, testing's great, but it's like a snapshot of one day, rather than like seeing like the whole breadth of work of like your marathon training, and especially looking at like your 3 half marathons that you did too, like probably would give great insight into that as well.
Yeah.
But given that you literally just got these,
right?
This is going to be like the best snapshot, and kind of like what I said, like the shoe that you also put the most time into and you get most familiar with is going to get more efficient.
Yep.
And at a point, you just got to pick a shoe. And all these numbers are pointing towards the Pro 4 being the shoe. And I think you can be pretty confident in Boston that you're in the best shoe for you.
Like, it's just cool to look at the data and have it confirmed that I'm going to be in the best shoe that I can be on the Boston Marathon course. And just like, when I toe that line, I'm not going to be sitting looking down at my shoes and saying, is this the right choice? When you have 2 great options, it's always a little bit of a coin toss, and it's nice to just have data to affirm that choice.